Hey everybody, it's Michael. I'm back again with another one of my walkthrough videos, and today I would like to show you Istanbul. Istanbul is a new game from Rüdiger Dorn, who is famous for many other games, and actually in this game you will see lots of parts that you already used in other games, such as trading, which is of course very prominent in Asante, in Jumbo, and also the Traders of Genoa. Then something that is reminiscent of the trade tower, I think it was, in Genoa. You also have movement and spatial patterns, also like in Genoa, and maybe also in Vecchio. But the game also offers some new elements, of course. The idea is that you're on the bazaar in Istanbul. The bazaar is made up of 16 location tiles. It's a modular board, and you have a stack, and on top is your merchant, and beneath him are your assistants. And whenever you move to a location and want to perform the action there, you have to leave an assistant behind. So at some point you will run out of assistants and have to get them back, and now you can double back to the locations you already visited, pick up the assistants again, and then you get to perform the action again. So by clever planning and finding out basically like a cycle, pick up and deliver cycle, so going somewhere, picking up something, going somewhere else, dropping it off, going back again, and so on, you are rewarded. There are other options to get your assistants back, but those are a little bit more cumbersome, and so you might lose momentum. So much for the game and the theme. Now let me give you some additional information. The game is for 2 to 5 players, ages 10 and up. It plays in about 40 to 60 minutes. The version I have here is the German and English version from Pegasus. The game itself is language independent. There are German and English rules in this box, and the only text in the game are the names of the locations, and the tiles are actually double-sided. There will be an English only edition from AG in, I think, June, which of course will then also have a distribution in the US. So after that short introduction, I would actually like to jump right in by showing you a full 3-player game. Have fun! So I've set up the game for 3 players, and as always, let's take a brief look at the components first. In the middle we have a 4-on-4 grid of 16 location tiles, and there are various ways in which you can arrange them, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. But for now we chose to arrange them by the blue numbers, so in order 1, 2 and so on. And this is a suggestion for a beginner's game or a shorter game called short distances, and we'll see in a while why exactly these distances are short. Each player starts with a merchant and 4 discs called assistants on the fountain, a family member in the police station, there's a smuggler and a governor whose starting position is determined randomly by the roll of 2 dice, and there you're looking for the big numbers. So I rolled a 3 for the smuggler, that's why he's here. Over here we have a supply of money, a 5th assistant for everybody, bonus cards, the 2 dice. And over here we have the possessions of the red player. He's the starting player, and thus he only starts with 2 lira. The other players have 1 lira more, depending on the player order, which is clockwise. So the blue player has 3, and the yellow player has 4. Each player also starts with a bonus card, and you can have as many as you want of those, but they're hidden in your hand. Each player has a player aid, and also a wheelbarrow with 4 indicators for the different goods. Right now, because these spaces are not filled yet, each good has a maximum capacity of 2, and you start with 0. And down here you can place your rubies, which is the goal of the game. You have to get 5 rubies, 6 in a 2-player game. And speaking of rubies, let's see how you can acquire those. Now there are 2 mosque locations, a great mosque and a small mosque, and each of these have 2 tiles with special abilities. And if you buy both tiles from a mosque, and you could only have 1 of each, then you get a ruby. Down here at the Wainwright you can upgrade your card by placing these chits into the slots on the card, and once you've upgraded your card 3 times you also get 1 ruby. Then over here we have a Sultan's Palace, where we filled up rubies up to and including the number of the players. And if you want to buy a ruby or trade in for a ruby, you have to supply all the wares up until that ruby. So for example now it's 1 of each and anywhere. But as soon as this one is bought, you have to supply an additional blue one to get that ruby. And over here it's a bit the same, but here it's only money. So if you want to buy that ruby, that's 14. But the next one is already a bit more expensive. And then we're already able to start the game. Now, on your turn, first you move your stack, which is the merchant and the assistants, 1 or 2 places. You can't stay where you are, you can't move diagonally. And when you arrive at a new location, there's 2 possibilities. Either there is already one of your assistants because you left them behind earlier, then place your stack on top of the assistant, Or if you don't have an assistant there, which will happen on the first turn of course, then you have to leave one behind. And if you can't do either, which would basically mean that your merchant arrives somewhere on its own, then you can't perform another action and your turn ends immediately. Afterward, if you encounter other merchants on the space, something happens, then you can carry out the action of the location that you went to, and afterwards there could be second encounters. So the red player now has to decide where he wants to go, 1 or 2 spaces. And he decides to move over to the spice warehouse, because that's also where the smuggler is. So he moves 1 space. He doesn't have an assistant there, so he has to leave 1 behind to perform the action. Now there's no encounter with another merchant of another player, so we get to perform the action on the space, which is to fill up your wheelbarrow to its maximum with spices. And right now the maximum is at 2. That's already the action performed, but then we can have an encounter with the smuggler. It's optional, and the smuggler would allow us to take 1 good and then either give another good back or pay 2 lira. Now the thing is that there are warehouses for the spices, for the fruit, and for the fabric, but there's no warehouse for the jewelry, because that's a little bit harder to acquire. So what we want to do, we actually want to use the smuggler to get a piece of jewelry, and then we would either have to give up another good, but we only have a spice to give, or pay 2 lira, which is exactly what we have. Since we had an encounter with the smuggler, we have to determine a new location for him. That's a 12, so that is the police station. And then red's turn is already done. The blue player moves to the fabric warehouse, leaves an assistant behind, and gets to max out his fabric. The yellow player also would like to get some fabric, but if he moves here, then he'll have an encounter with the other merchant, meaning he would have to pay him 2 lira, and he doesn't want that, so he decides to move over to the police station. Now on the police station, you can send your family member, if it's there, to any space and use the ability of that space, and you don't have any encounters there. He takes his family member, puts to the fabric warehouse, gets to perform the action, and then afterwards he has a meeting with the smuggler, and he also decides to take a blue ware, which costs him 2 lira. Need to send the smuggler somewhere else, and that's black market, which is kind of fitting for a smuggler. The red player moves to the small mosque. The assistant stays behind until he comes back to pick him up again. And on the small mosque you can buy 1 of the 2 bonus tiles, which will give you special abilities, and for that you need 2 of the appropriate good, and then you need to spend 1 of them. We have 2, and we pay 1 of them, and then we're allowed to collect this tile, which will allow us, whenever we fill up wares in any of the warehouses, because this has the symbol with a crate, and that symbol also appears on the warehouses, then we can buy 1 good for 2. So basically, if we go to any warehouse, we can buy any of the other goods, including the rare blue jewelries. So we'll just keep that one. And now if you take a look, the next one is already a bit, not necessarily more expensive, because you still only have to pay 1 good, but you have to have 3 of them now. And now you can also maybe see why this is the short distances setup, because the small mosque requires green and red goods, and the warehouses for those are really close. The same here, over here, this one requires blue, yes, that's a little bit harder to get, and yellow, and the fruit warehouse is right down here. The blue player also moves to the small mosque. The red player is there, so he has to pay him 2 lira. And then he can buy the red bonus tile. And that one will allow him to re-roll or change his die rolls on spaces that, well, require die rolls. The yellow player moves to the post office. Here you get everything that's visible right now, so that's 2 lira, 1 green and 1 yellow. And then you move the leftmost mail indicator that's still on the top down to the bottom, and now the selection is changed for the next player who goes there. The red player moves to the fabric warehouse. That there's another assistant there, doesn't matter. He gets to fill up his fabric. Then he decides to use the special ability of his mosque tile, pay 2 lira, and also take a blue good. And then he encountered another family member. And if you do, you can basically catch them, send them back to the police station. So apparently these family members are up to no good. And for that you get a reward, which is either 3 lira or another bonus card. And he decides to draw another bonus card. The blue player moves 2 spaces down to the tea house. And the tea house you can gamble for money, apparently by playing backgammon as it looks like. And it works like this. You announce a number between 3 and 12, then you roll the 2 dice. If you roll equal or higher to your number, then you get that amount in lira, what you bet. And if you roll lower, then you only get 2 lira. And the nice thing is that with this bonus tile, after rolling, he can either re-roll entirely or change one of the dice to a 4. He bets or announces 7. That's an 11 right here. So we rolled equal to or higher than our bet, and so he receives 7 lira. The yellow player decides to play his bonus card, which means that he can move 3 or 4 spaces instead of 1 or 2. The card is discarded to the discard pile in the caravanserai, and then he can move 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces over to the Sultan's palace. Now, to get a ruby, he has to have one of each good and any good, and he has exactly that, so he pays all of it and gets the first ruby. The red player moves over to the police station, putting his last assistant there, and then he sends his family member over to the fruit warehouse. He doesn't have any money to use his special ability, he doesn't have too much space anyway. He does have an encounter with the governor, because it's only a family member. The blue player moves over to the Wainwright, where he can pay 7 to get an upgrade for his wheelbarrow. And now he can store 3 of each good. The yellow player moves over to the caravanserai. Here you can draw 2 bonus cards, and then you have to discard 1. And as a special rule on here, when you draw cards, you can also take the top card of the discard pile. But let's take a hidden one first. Now this one would allow him at the gemstone dealer to perform the action twice in a row, but of course for that you need a lot of money. And so instead of drawing a second card, he decides to take one from here. He keeps that one, so the other one has to go here. The red player has to run out of assistance, so wherever he moves, he wouldn't be able to perform the action there, unless he moves somewhere where he already has an assistant. But the only space within reach is the fabric warehouse, and going there wouldn't make much sense because he already is maxed out on his fabric. So what he does is he moves over to the fountain, and the special ability of the fountain, even if you arrive alone, is to get back all your assistants. So you either have to plan carefully how you move around, making sure that you get to perform the action when you drop off an assistant, but also when you collect them, or you have to go back to the fountain once in a while to get back your assistants. Also, if you were to meet other merchants at the fountain, you wouldn't have to pay them. The blue player is in the same situation, but he actually decides to backtrack over to the tea house, so he puts the assistant beneath his merchant again, but he gets to perform the action, and he decides to announce 8 this time. And that's a bit of a bad luck, because even if he were to use his ability to turn 1 dice over to a 4, that's still not enough, so he only gets 2 lira. The yellow player moves up to the police station, meeting his assistant, and he sends his family member over to the spice warehouse. The red player decides to play a bonus card. It's the one where he can move up to 4 spaces. And he decides to move 1, 2, 3 spaces down to the large market. And on the large market, and the small market as well, there is a demand tile on top, and you can give up as many goods depicted on there as you want, and depending on how many you give up, you get money accordingly. So he has all 5 of them actually, so 1 red, 2 blue, a green and a yellow. So he gets 25 lira, and then as you might expect, the demand tile is put on the bottom. And now for this tile we need 3 of the blue goods. And this is basically the difference between the large and the small market. They all have 5 goods on the demand tiles, but the small market has less of the blue goods. Of course you can earn less money there. The blue player moves up to the spice warehouse, so he can now collect 3 spices. He can also send back the yellow family member, and as his reward he decides to draw a bonus card, which is any good. The yellow player moves back to the post office again, so now he gets 2 lira, a red and a yellow. The red player moves up to the small market. He still has a yellow and a red good left. Both appear on the current demand tile, so he earns 5 lira. And then this one is put at the bottom. The blue player moves up to the small mosque. Yes, he still has an assistant there. He picks him up again. He can use the mosque again. He already has the red bonus tile, but he can now purchase the green one. Because he has 3 green goods, he has to pay 1 of them. Now he has both bonus tiles from the same mosque, so he also gets 1 ruby. The yellow player moves down to the caravanserai, gets to draw 2 cards. Again, he takes the first from the deck. That is a card where you don't have to move at all, and he decides to draw another one. 5 lira. And he decides to keep the one where you don't have to move at all. The red player moves over to the gemstone dealer. Now he could pay 14 for a ruby, but he has a bonus card that allows him to perform the action there twice. So the first ruby costs him 14, the second one costs him 15. He has 30, gets one back, and now has 2 rubies. The blue player simply moves over here, picks up his assistant again at the fabric warehouse, and he decides to use his ability, spend 2, and also get a yellow good. The yellow player decides to use this bonus card so he can stay where he is. Since there isn't an assistant on the space, he has to leave one behind again. He can draw 2 cards again. This one is you can take an assistant back from anywhere. Again, this one is you can perform the action on the Sultan's Palace twice. We don't want that one. The red player moves up to the spice warehouse. He doesn't have enough money to use his special tile. The blue player moves to the small market. And then he decides to use his bonus card to get a yellow good. And then he can fulfill that demand entirely. And so he gets 20 lira. The yellow player moves over to the black market. Here he gets any one of the non-blue goods, and then he can roll 2 dice. Depending on how good he rolls, he gets blue goods. That's a 9, which is actually 2 blue goods, so he's very lucky. And then you can do this in either order, so he also decides to take a red good. And then he could actually use the smuggler, but the thing is, he doesn't have capacity for anything, so he could get a yellow and pay something else. But he actually decides to do this, but he doesn't pay another good, but 2 lira instead. Then we have to send the smuggler somewhere else, which is the small market. The red player decides to go to the fountain again to get all his assistants back. Since he has 21 lira lying around, the blue player of course decides to go to the gemstone dealer. He has to pay 16. The yellow player moves to the Sultan's Palace. He needs 2 blue, then 1 of each of the others, plus anyone. 2 blue, 1 of each, and anyone. So he gets to collect this ruby. The red player moves over to the small market. He can sell 2 greens, which is all he has. That earns him 5, and then this one is moved to the bottom. And then he decides to buy a blue good off the smuggler. And the smuggler moves over to the caravanserai. The blue player moves up to the spice warehouse and he decides to buy a blue good. The yellow player moves to the fruit warehouse. Then he gets to send this one back. He decides to take a bonus card as reward. Again a movement card. And then he can interact with the governor. And the governor lets you take 1 bonus card and then you have to discard 1 bonus card or pay 2 lira. This one allows you, when fulfilling demands at the small market, you can sell any good you like. So basically any 5 goods will give you 20. And then he decides to pay the governor by discarding this card. So the governor moves to the fabric warehouse. The red player would like an extension for his wheelbarrow, but he only has 4. So he decides to move over to the tea house, and not wanting to take too much risk, he decides to just call 4. And that is more than enough. The blue player would also like to go to the tea house, but he doesn't want to pay the red player. So he decides to move over to the small market. He uses a bonus card to get a yellow good, and then he can pay a blue, a red, a green, and a yellow, so 4 goods. Unfortunately, he didn't have a second yellow one, but that's still 14. The yellow player moves up here to the Great Mosque. Decides to get this tile. Just to pay a yellow one. And this one will allow him, at any point during his move, to pay 2 money to get an assistant back to him. The red player moves over to the Rainride. Gets an extension. The blue player visits the gemstone dealer once again. He has to pay 17, which is exactly what he has. And then he has his 3rd ruby already. The yellow player moves to the black market, picks up his assistant, gets to roll the dice. An 8, so that's only 1 blue good. And then he decides to take a red one as well. The red player decides to come over to the caravanserai. He decides to take this card and also draw 1. He decides to put this one back. And now he could interact with the smuggler, but he only has a blue good to give. Also, he doesn't have the 2 lira to pay him, but he also doesn't want to have the smuggler so close to the yellow player. So what he decides to do is get a good from him, pay him back that good, but that will trigger his movement, which is the black market. The blue player moves to the tea house, decides to call a 7. That's enough. Now the yellow player needs a second blue good to be able to acquire this tile up here. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a card that would let him stay where he is, so he decides to move to the police station first. He could send his family member down to the black market, but this is a bit of a gamble, so he decides to send it up to the post office first, collecting 3 lira, a red and a yellow. And now, if he moves here later by himself, he'll be able to get the blue good here. The red player simply decides to go back to the fountain once again. The blue player decides to visit the Wainwright. He has exactly 7 from his tea house gambling earlier, so he gets his second extension. The yellow player wants to visit the post office. The problem is he doesn't have any assistance anymore. Now he could pay 2 lira to use the special ability to get one back, but he also has a bonus card that allows him to do this for free. And he decides to get the one over here at the fruit warehouse back. Then he can move up here, leave him behind, get 3 lira, a red and a blue. The red player moves to the fabric warehouse. He decides to interact with the governor. Now this one will allow him to send his own family member back to the prison, back to the police station, and then collect the reward, but it's not as interesting, so he decides to put that one back. The blue player still needs 1 extension to get another ruby, so he decides to go back to the tea house and call a 7 again. Now, even if he would use special ability to turn 1 die to a 4, that wouldn't be sufficient, but he can entirely reroll. That's not much better, so he only gets 2. The yellow player moves over here, meeting his assistant again, and he decides to get this tile. He has to pay 1 blue good. He gets his 5th assistant immediately. And he also gets a ruby because he now has both tiles from the Great Mosque. The red player moves over to the small mosque, gets a red bonus tile, pays a red good, and also gets his 3rd ruby. Since the blue player is still a couple of lira short for the Wainwright, he decides to move over to the small market. He can pay 1 red and 2 green, all of which are in demand, so that's 3 goods for a total of 9. The yellow player moves to the black market. He can roll. He doesn't get any blue goods. He does get 1 other though. The only thing he has space for is a green one. Then he can interact with a smuggler and get a blue one for 2 lira. The smuggler is sent to the food warehouse, and then he can also interact with the governor. A good of any choice, that's great. And he also decides to pay 2 lira for the card. So the governor moves to the large market. The red player moves to the post office, and I think I forgot to put the market down before, so it actually looks like this. So he gets 4 lira, a red and a blue one. Now you would have to put a market down, but since all at the bottom, you move everything up instead. And then you can send back the yellow family member and get a bonus card as a reward. And this one is again the one where you would be able to perform the action at the Sultan's Palace twice, which is probably not too useful for him right now. The blue player moves to the Wainwright, pays 7, gets his final extension, and thus his 4th ruby. The yellow player moves to the Sultan's Palace. Now he has to give up 2 blue, 2 red, 1 green, 1 yellow, plus another one. And he also has his 4th ruby. The red player moves over to the Great Mosque, uses his bonus card to get a blue good. Then he can acquire this tile, and he gets his 5th assistant. The blue player moves to the tea house, decides to call an 8. That's a 5, but luckily he can use his ability, so he has exactly 8. The yellow player moves over here, decides to draw 1 card from the deck, draw this one, and then put this one back. The red player moves down here to the fruit warehouse. Then he decides to use his special ability to buy a blue good. And then he could interact with the smuggler, but he actually doesn't decide to do that because then he would just send him somewhere else where he could benefit somebody else. The blue player decides to move up to the spice warehouse. And then he also spends 2 lira on a red good. The yellow player moves to the police station, sends his family member up to the fabric. The blue player moves to the small market. He can pay 3 green and a red for 14. And now he has enough to buy his last ruby. And of course we have to switch the demand. The yellow player also decides to come over here, so he has to pay 2 lira to the blue player. First he uses these 2 bonus cards to get any 2 goods, and then he uses this bonus card to fulfill a demand with any goods as he likes. He has exactly 5 goods, pays them all, and so he gets 20. Also enough to buy his 5th ruby. And of course we have to get rid of the demand. The red player moves to a fruit warehouse. He gets 1 fruit. He decides to pay 2 for a green. Then he decides to encounter the smuggler for another green, and he pays him a yellow. The smuggler moves to this 5, which is the post office. And now the red player has enough goods to actually get his 5th gemstone down here. But it seems that he's running out of time, because the blue player moves over here, pays 18, gets his final gemstone, meaning that the round will only be played to the end, so only yellow gets another turn. And yellow's turn is pretty similar. He moves over here, has to pay 2 lira to blue, but then he can acquire the gemstone for 19, and then that's it. Red doesn't get a turn anymore, but now we have a tie because both players acquired 5 rubies. Now both players would be able to use any bonus cards they still have available. This one is of no use to the yellow player because the first tiebreaker is leftover lira, and here blue has 10 as opposed to 3, making blue the overall winner. And that was one full 3-player game of Istanbul. A few more words about the different setups for the location tiles. This is the one you've just seen, the short distances. We've seen how fortunate it was for the blue player that the tea house, the Wainwright, and the gemstone dealer were in such close vicinity. And again, as a reminder, this is the order that we get if we sort the tiles by the blue numbers. Now let me show you what happens if we use the green numbers, the so-called long distances. So this is what long distances looks like. For example, the gemstone dealer is far away from the small market, the large market, and the tea house. So if you want to generate money and go back there, you have longer distances to go. Also the mosques are further away from the depots or the black market that gives the required goods to get the tiles there, and so on and so on. And finally, let me show you the third variant, which is called order, and here we'll sort by the large numbers. And as the name implies, order has all the locations ordered. So for example, all the warehouses are up here, as well as the Wainwright. We have the markets here in the middle, the mosques down here, flanked by the gemstone dealer and the Sultan's Palace. And then finally, of course, you can make the order entirely random, which is probably what's best for experienced players. However, there are 2 rules you should follow. The fountain should always be in the 4 center spaces, so it's easy reachable, and there should be a minimum distance of 3 between the tea house and the black market. A few words about the 2-player game. As already said, in a 2-player game you play until somebody has 6 rubies. And also to make things a little bit more interesting at the beginning of the game, you put the 3 unused merchants on both mosques and the gemstone dealer, and whenever you encounter one of those, you have to pay 2 lira as always, but of course now to the bank because there's no owner for these. And afterwards you roll 2 dice to determine a new location for them, as you would with the smuggler and the governor. And finally, there's an advanced variant for the 2 to 4-player game, in which at setup you replace your bottommost assistant with one of a neutral color. And of course, whenever you leave that assistant behind, it stays behind. But then if other players encounter it, they can pick it up as if it were their own. And they're also able to accumulate multiple neutral assistants. When you go to the fountain, you only get back your assistants, not the neutral one. What this basically does is it gives you opportunities to use more actions while moving around the board, because other players can open up opportunities for you. So I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of Istanbul. Hopefully I could show you how easy and smooth this game plays, both in the overall playtime, but also how quick your turns go. You basically just will move somewhere, pick up an assistant or leave one there, perform a quick action, and then it's the next player's turn. Hopefully I could also show you how this movement mechanism works. Players are rewarded if they're able to tie locations together that work well with each other, that are close to each other so that you can benefit the most from doubling back and picking up your resistance again. Because if you don't, then you have to stop at the fountain or use the ability of the one mosque tile that costs money. And we also saw how the red player, who I think went to the fountain 2 or 3 times over the game, basically lost a bit of momentum because of that. And hopefully I could also give you an idea how replayable this game is, mainly because you have, of course, these different setups for the location tiles. If you have a variable setup, and everybody has to see which routes are the best. Now, I'm probably not the only one to say this, but I wouldn't be too surprised if this ends up getting a Kennerspiel des Jahres nomination. Yes, the games that were nominated last year were a bit more complex, I think, but I think this might have good chances, but we'll know more in a couple of weeks. And I have to say, it's also very refreshing to have a game again where you just play until somebody has won and you don't play for a fixed amount of turns and then you have to do the whole victory point counting thing. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, have fun playing, and until next time. Bye bye.